Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, honorable members of the committee. My name is Mark Meckler. Again, I'm president of Convention of States Action, and we are the organization pushing this resolution forward all over the country. So far, 15 of your fellow states have passed this resolution. There are over 4.3 million citizens in support of this resolution across the country. And in the great state of South Dakota, I'm proud to announce that over 5,100 people have signed petitions in support of this resolution in your state. This resolution is particularly important for federalism. Most of us consider ourselves federalists. We understand that we exist within a federalist form of government, and federalism requires that the states assert themselves. And you, as state legislatures, were given a unique and powerful role in the United States Constitution. You, and only you, have the power in the federal system of governance to call a convention, to propose amendments restraining federal tyranny, and to ratify those amendments. The president does not have that power. Congress does not have that power. And though the courts seem to think they do sometimes, they were not granted that power by the Constitution. I've asked myself many times, why did the founders grant you, in particular, this power? It is an extraordinary power, and if you look at our history, I think the answer why they granted you this power is pretty clear. They were you. They sat in colonial legislatures like you sit in this legislature today. They sat on town councils and county boards. And the founders trusted something. They didn't trust human nature. They didn't trust human beings, but they trusted government close to the people. They were worried about a faraway central government, and they predicted tyranny to come from the government that they were forming. They formed up this government, they provided checks and balances, and the ultimate check for federalism that they provided is found in Article 5. And I think it's important and educational how this clause we're talking about came to be. Colonel George Mason addressed the Assembly 2 days before the end of the convention, and he said that there was a flaw in the document they had drafted. They had given the federal government, the Congress, the power to propose amendments, but they had not given that same power to the people acting through the states. And he said that he was concerned that no tyranny would ever propose amendments to restrain its own tyranny. I imagine they laughed. We don't have videotape, so we don't know for sure. But Madison's notes make it fairly clear that they did. His notes say NINCOM or no comment. There was no debate on this issue. And in fact, unanimously, the men in that convention voted to give you this extraordinary power. Today, our nation hangs in the balance. Most power is concentrated in Washington, D.C. Most state budgets are controlled somewhere at the 60% level by the federal government. This is not the government that the founders intended us to live under in South Dakota or any other state. And so that is why today the people all across this country are rising up, and they are rising up and organizing to take the power back from the federal government. I'll close with this. It's important to know the kinds of people nationally that are for and against a movement like this. On the side of this movement are luminaries like Mark Levin and Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity and Glenn Beck and Ben Shapiro, constitutional scholars like Professor Randy Barnett at Georgetown, Robbie George at Princeton, John Eastman at Chapman, the greatest conservative and libertarian constitutional scholars in the land. There are no nationally known conservative figures that have taken a position against this. And our opposition is made up of the most radical fringe of the left in America. They've signed a press release against this. Common Cause, Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, Planned Parenthood, La Raza, all have taken public stands against this. The battle lines are drawn. These are Constitution-loving Americans who like the federal system that our founders designed against statists who wish to centralize power in Washington, D.C. against the interests of the people in the states. That is why I am here in support of this resolution. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Mark Meckler, President of Convention of States Action. Many misstatements of fact and truth have been made that I feel necessary to correct. I think people who've made them make them in good faith. I think everybody who comes before this committee is acting in good faith. That's a presumption we can start with. I'd like to deal with some of the things that Representative Johnson just said. With all due respect, he's clearly an expert in this chamber and clearly lacks an understanding of how our federal system of governance works. He showed you a pocket constitution and said, this is our Constitution. And while I agree with him, this is the Constitution as drafted by the founders with the Bill of Rights. The way our system of government works since Marbury versus Madison is that the Supreme Court is, unfortunately, in my opinion, the ultimate arbiter of what the Constitution means. The Constitution we live under is, unfortunately, in my opinion, only the Constitution as interpreted by the United States Supreme Court. This is that Constitution. And so while Mr. Johnson may not recognize this as reality, unfortunately, if you order the Constitution of the United States from the federal government, if you want to know what they believe the Constitution is, what their authority is, it comes from this book. It's over 2,700 pages as of 2012. Today, it's over 3,000 pages with all the addendums added to it, all the case law added to it. The things that take away the power of South Dakotans are in this Constitution. There are a line of cases, primarily I would point to the Commerce Clause cases, expanding federal government authority and taking away your authority. So we have to deal with the reality that unfortunately the Supreme Court has given us this. And the founders gave us a remedy if we don't like what the Supreme Court did. It's in this one that Representative Johnson likes and that we all love. And it's in Article 5, and it gives us the power to take this back to this. That's what we're trying to do. I also heard somebody today at length quote Chief Justice Warren Burger. Warren Burger warned us of a runaway convention. By the way, the first person in American history to use that term. We have to ask ourselves, well, who was Warren Burger? And I think it's important that we know Warren Burger and his place in American jurisprudential history. Warren Burger was a liberal, activist, justice, Supreme Court justice, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He was the presiding justice over Roe versus Wade. I think one of the most egregious abuses of federal judicial power in American history. And he was being asked this question at a time when states all across the country were proposing Article 5 resolutions to overturn Roe versus Wade. What is that Chief Justice likely to say in response to the question, should we hold such a convention? Of course, a liberal activist jurist who gave us Roe versus Wade was openly opposed to a convention to overturn Roe versus Wade. And it surprises me, to be honest with you, to hear good conservatives, and I believe they are good conservatives, quoting Chief Justice Warren Burger. No good conservative should ever do that. I think the most important thing that I have to rebut is the idea that somehow the founders didn't know what they were doing when they put Article 5 in the Constitution. They were very clear. They said at convention, the idea was to have a check against federal tyranny. This is not just about governance. This is about human nature. Human beings naturally accrue power to themselves. And the more power they have, the more power they want. I think we can generalize that about human beings. We are flawed creatures. And so today, what we're asking you to do is exercise the power that you have, that the founders gave you, to push back against an overreaching federal government. And I'll close with this. The opponents to this resolution talk often of this is scary, this is dangerous, we should be worried about this. But they do agree with us on one thing. We all agree on one thing. The federal government is entirely out of control, and it will not rein itself in. And my question to you and our opponents is, if it will not rein itself in, then what should we do? And what you will never hear, and you did not hear today from the opponents, and I have never heard from any of our opponents in hundreds of hours of testimony all over the country, is what they propose we do to rein in a runaway federal government. I can tell you 4.3 million people across this country and over 5,000 South Dakotans say, we must use Article 5 now to rein in that runaway federal government. Mr. Chairman, thank you.